Jamin, thank you for joining me again. Last time we looked at the successes of King Saul. Today we're going to look at some of his failures too. So we see here, and we talked about this at the end of the last video, he's coming off this great battle. He's victorious. God has led him. He's been merciful towards those who tried to rebel against him at the very, very beginning of his reign. And he ends that by rejoicing and glorifying God with the men of Israel. Unfortunately, as with everybody, he succumbs to temptation. He has some sinful behaviors too. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of those things.
So the first time that we see him stumble and fall into temptation and sin is in verse 13, when he's about to go into battle against the Philistines. So if we read in chapter 13 of 1 Samuel, verses 6 through 9, we see his first sin that is recorded. When the men of Israel saw that they were in danger, for the people were distressed, then the people hid in caves, and in the thickets, in the rocks, in the holes, and in the pits. And some of the Hebrews crossed over the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. As for Saul, he was still in Gilgal, and all the people followed him trembling. Then he waited 7 days, according to the time set by Samuel. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people were scattered from him. So Saul said, "Bring a burnt offering and peace offerings here to me." And he offered the burnt offerings. So we see that some of the strength that we saw previously in chapters 11 and 12 are not necessarily present.
Yeah.
There's some distrust there of God. And so he's about to go against the Philistines, as he had already gone against others. And the people are afraid. Mm-hmm. And as the leader, instead of stepping up and securing their faith in God, he is a little afraid too, it seems. Mm-hmm. And so the people begin to scatter, and he is waiting for Samuel. Samuel has told him, "I will come in 7 days and offer the burnt offering before you go to battle." And Samuel doesn't show up on that 7th day in the morning. Yeah. And so Saul, trying to make sure that he obeys God in his own way, he goes and he offers a burnt offering. And then shortly thereafter in verse 10, which we didn't read, but we see that Samuel shows up. Mm-hmm. So we have Saul. This is the first time the temptation of, I'm about to lose my kingship because the individuals of my kingdom are scattering, and he goes and tries to save it on his own.
Yeah. Yeah, and in verse 11, Samuel confronts him about this. Saul, you see, he blames everybody but himself. There's a lot of, the people were scattering, you didn't show up, like, it's not my fault that I did this. It's other people's fault that I had to do it, you know. The sacrifice needed to be offered. That is absolutely 100% true. It didn't have to be offered by Saul. It shouldn't have been offered by Saul. But he's trying to self-justify his actions in this moment. We see some of that later on too. Throughout his kingship, we see a number of these things. The next episode we see in chapter 14. Saul, some of this impulsivity and rashness comes up. Again, they're fighting the Philistines here. Jonathan, his son, is out doing battle. Unbeknownst to Saul, Saul's makes this rash vow here that in verse 24, "Cursed is the man who eats any food until evening, before I have taken vengeance upon my enemies." The Philistines were enemies of the people of Israel, but really they were enemies of God. They weren't Saul's personal enemies. They were enemies of all that God stood for, all his holiness and his righteousness, and the idolatrous nature of the Philistines had a really negative impact upon Israel. They were God's enemies in this sense. And so Saul's here taking this upon himself and making this rash judgment, saying, no one's going to eat until I've gotten my vengeance. Jonathan doesn't know this because he's out battling. And so the people go out to join Jonathan. They're hungry. They're tired. They fight away the Philistines, but they were only a little bit successful. They weren't overwhelmingly successful like we saw in the previous battle, where not even 2 individuals were still together of their enemies. They get away. Jonathan, because he's hungry, he's been battling, doesn't know about this. He finds some food out on the battlefield, in this case some honey, and he eats. That was against the judgment of Saul. And so Saul here, he's going to act upon this curse that he's pronounced. In verse 39, for as the Lord lives, who saves Israel, though it be in Jonathan my son, he shall surely die. Saul's ready to act upon this rash judgment he's made. He's not repenting of it. He's making additional rash judgment upon the rash judgment he's already made. The people here, in this instance, saves him. But again, we see Saul not consulting with God, not doing what he's supposed to do in terms of being this leader that the people need. He's being impulsive. He's being rash and prideful in this moment, seeking after his own vengeance. He's not being the leader that God has selected him to be.
So it's interesting to see just in these 4 or 5 short chapters that we read, there's a strong duality amongst what has happened. And if you just read it as a story, it's one thing. But if you genuinely look and contrast it between what has happened before at the beginning and what is happening now, you see some strong comparisons that you might want to make. When we look at Saul, he's hidden. He's hiding amongst the equipment. He's maybe humble, maybe a little bit scared, not rash. Very opposite of rash.
Right.
But he is called, and he does what he's called to do. But here, now we see he is so rash that he doesn't consult God and puts his own son in danger. So if we look at the Saul just 3 chapters ago, we see a very different Saul, which is just a short time period. What I also see is the revenge portion. One of the things that we talk about, one of Saul's good traits, is the fact that he tries to incorporate the individuals who have sinned against him or sinned against God, but specifically going against what Saul was doing as king. And here he is. He doesn't say, and I think you hit upon this, the enemies of my God, my enemies, and my vengeance. And it's very me-centric. Mm-hmm. And that's very different from what we saw just 2 chapters ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so in chapter 15, next chapter, we see that stumbling of Saul continues. And so we see that Saul goes against the Amalekites, and he is told that he is to destroy everything. And so let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 15. And I'll read verse 3, and then I'll start back. I'll go through verse 9. Now go and attack Amalek, and utterly destroy all that they have, and do not spare them, but kill both man and woman and infant and nursing child, ox and sheep and camel and donkey. So Saul gathered the people together and numbered them in Telhim, 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 men of Judah. And Saul came to the city of Amalek, and lay in wait in the valley. Then Saul said to the Kenites, Go, depart, get down from among the Amalekites, lest I destroy you with them. For you showed kindness to all the children of Israel when they came up out of Egypt. So the Kenites departed, and among them the Amalekites. And Saul attacked the Amalekites from Haviel all the way to Shur, which is east of Egypt. He also took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag the best of the sheep, and the oxen, and the fatlings, and the lamb, and all that was good, and were unwilling to utterly destroy them. But everything despised and worthless they were utterly destroyed. So we see here in just this short verse, couple of verses, we see a directive given by God to destroy everything. And God almost dictates every little thing that he wants to be destroyed. He talks about the women, the children, everything. And what we see Saul, in his own right, spare the things that he decides is good. Mm-hmm. And he spares Agag, their king, along with some of the best of the sheep and the cattle and so on and so forth.
Yeah, what I find really interesting in this story is so much of the similarities from a couple chapters ago, where he offered the sinful sacrifice before attacking the Philistines. Some of those exact same excuses come up when Samuel confronts him and says, there's the king. Why am I hearing sheep in the background? Like, why have you not done what God said to do? The people, verse 15, Saul says, the people, they have brought them from the Amalekites. For the people spared the best of the sheep and the oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed. Saul's again failing to take accountability for his own actions and the actions of the people as a leader. He's not wrong in this verse. We see that in verse 9. But Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep and the oxen and the fats and the lambs. The people did do those things under the leadership of Saul. And we see the really negative impact that a bad leader or a leader who's failing to follow God himself can have upon the people of God. In this moment, Saul fails to be the leader that they need, to say, this is what God says to do. We're going to destroy all the people. We're going to destroy all the animals and all the things. He didn't do that. He led them in this moment of sparing the king and some of the animals because, again, he was self-justifying. He was promoting his own will above the will of God. He was doing what was right in his own eyes instead of following after the way of God.
So one of the things that we see in throughout the scriptures is patterns. And patterns, I think, I believe are God's way of showing and emphasizing who we should be as people.
Yeah.
When I read this story, I think back to Aaron. And Aaron at the bottom of Mount Sinai, while Moses is getting the tablets, Aaron takes the will of the people and he takes the gold and he makes this calf that they begin to worship. And then when Moses comes down, it's almost a mirror of what you see from Saul.
Right.
The people made me do it. And Aaron is not just one of the people, he's one of the leaders, just like Saul. Saul is one of the leaders. And so to me, this is a strong indicator and characteristic that we can take away of being the leader. And we see that Saul could have been a leader. He could have had everything destroyed. He was supposed to. He had the power as king, and yet instead of doing that, he does what's good in his eyes, and then blames everybody else.
Right. Right. He really fails in this moment to take accountability and correct his actions. He could have still been the leader God wanted him to be.
Right.
He's not beyond redemption at this point.
Right.
He doesn't do it. Let's go to the next point here. So, because of Saul's sins, Samuel tells him, I'm going to remove the kingdom from you. Your sons are not going to continue it. I'm going to give it to somebody else. David is selected by God as the next king in chapter 16. In chapter 17, again, the Philistines are there. They are a continual thorn in the side of Israel. Goliath comes forward as the champion of the Philistines, this giant amongst them who comes out and taunts the people of Israel and threatens them. He says, we're going to do one-on-one battle. I'm going to fight whoever you want to put forward, your champion. Whoever wins is going to be declared the victor of this battle. In verse 10, I defy the man of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. And of course, we know David heard this, goes out, does battle with Goliath, kills Goliath, and the Israelites are victorious in the battle because of that. Saul's response, though, in verse 11, is right back to that man who hid among the equipment. He's terrified, paralyzed in this moment to step up and be the leader that Israel needs him to be. He could have put forth someone. They would have been victorious with the guidance of God if Saul had only sought out and asked. But he didn't. He's so scared in this moment. He doesn't know what to do. And because of this, the people are scared too. They're following after their leader, the leader that was after their own heart. He's terrified. They can't do anything either.
Yeah, and as leader, how much of an impact it would have had if he would have stepped up
Mm-hmm.
and he would have gone to God before the people, and if he would have went out to meet Goliath, because most likely he would have been triumphant, assuming that is what God had requested.
Right.
Um, and, but when we see David go up, who do the people start to fall in love with? They
Mm-hmm.
fall in love with David because he is following God's will. He is following what he was supposed to do. He's showing his leadership. And so we go back to that first chapter that we see Saul, where he does a great job in uniting the
Mm-hmm.
people because he stepped up and he was a leader. The people weren't afraid because
Right.
they had faith in God, because the leader had faith in God. And the leader was stepping up and leading. Here he's hiding in his tent. He's afraid. Then the people are afraid, and it takes some other man to come into the camp. Not even a man, a boy.
Right. Right.
Some other boy to come up into the camp and show them what leadership looks like. And I think, to me, that I think we don't read this in the scriptures, but how demoralizing for Saul. A young boy comes and becomes a leader more than what he, who was supposed to be the leader, should have been.
Right. I actually think we do see some of that. So later, after this victory, David becomes a soldier and he's out fighting the Philistines. And in chapter 18, so the women sang as they danced and said, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. The people, to your point, are rallying around David at this point. Saul, in verse 8, was very angry and the saying displeased him. And he said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed only thousands. Now what more can he have but the kingdom? And you see this paranoia and some jealousy and demoralized attitude that he has, because he is no longer the people's leader. He is a king in name only. Yes, he was anointed by God. He's still sitting on the throne. David's also anointed, but not sitting on the throne. And so Saul begins this intense struggle with David for what he thinks belongs to him. God's already taken it away. He's already given it to David. Saul's still alive. David is really, in all effectiveness, the leader of the people in this moment. And Saul is attempting to kill him and resolve this solution, or resolve this situation in a really terrible way by killing God's anointed. And you see, he throws a spear at him. He attempts to trick him into fighting the Philistines, thinking that the Philistines will kill him. He commands people to go out and kill him. He sends messengers to kill him. He tries to get Jonathan to kill him. Over and over, he's finding different ways to try to stop this perceived problem where he's not the leader of the people. Instead of just simply taking ownership of the situation and saying, I know I'm not going to pass this forward to my son. I can still be effective, though. I can still turn back to God and do what's right. He doesn't. To the point to where by the end of his life, at the end of the book, he's really, so far, he doesn't even know how to ask God anymore for help. And so we see in chapter 28 and verse 3, the Philistines again are coming up against Israel. In verse 5, when Saul saw the army of the Philistines, he was afraid and his heart trembled greatly. Samuel's dead at this point. And when Saul inquired of the Lord didn't answer him, either by dreams or by Urim or by the prophets. Saul has gone so far from where God wanted him to be as a leader. Saul doesn't know how to get back there. He's so far in the dark. He can't find the light anymore. This is the last moments of his life, and he's alone, and he's in darkness, and he's not at all living up to the potential that God had for him.
Yeah, and then we see that he consults that medium.
Yeah.
And to me, now we've gone a full 180. When we get to that point, it seems like there is no turning back. It's not seeking after God anymore. He's going to go after this medium to look for some kind of power or strength or grasp onto what's left of his kingdom. And we know that that's already been taken away.
It's gone. Yeah. This really highlights, I think, what the Hebrew writer is talking about in chapter 2. And beginning in verse 1, therefore we must give the more earnest heed to the things we have heard, lest we drift away. For if the word spoken through the angels proved steadfast, and every transgression and disobedience received a just reward, how shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation, which at the first began to be spoken by the Lord, and was confirmed to us by those who heard him? So there's this real danger of drifting away. This is exactly what Saul did in this moment. He didn't set out in the beginning of that drift deciding, oh, I'm going to serve myself. I'm not going to follow God anymore. I'm going to eliminate anybody that's a threat to my kingdom. He recognized in that battle against the Philistines, this sacrifice needs to be offered. His intentions were to please God in that moment and go out and beat the Philistines and preserve the nation of Israel in that moment. He didn't follow the pattern that you were talking about earlier. It was a small deviation, but it was a deviation nonetheless. But starting with that moment, we see how far he drifted in the end, to where when he tried to seek after God at the end of his life, he didn't know where to turn. And he turned to that medium, and once again, a sinful action. So far gone, so far drifted, he couldn't even find that moment. We are also living under the same potential danger, that if we don't give earnest heed to the things we have heard, to continue to grow and strive to serve after God, each and every moment and every decision we have to come to and follow after the pattern that God wants us to do, we can also drift away to the point to where we don't know how to find Christ anymore.
Yeah, it's not very often that we see Christians just completely fall away in one day or one fell swoop.
Yeah.
It's and to me, what we learn from Saul in chapter 13 of 1 Samuel is we see it's step by step he walks away from God. It starts with distrust. He distrusts God, and that's why he makes that sacrifice. He distrusts God, and that's why he decides to keep Agag and the animals. So that distrust seeds a life that we never see really come back to.
Yeah.
It seeds this life of evil and not following after God. So in our own lives, there's going to be sin, there's going to be temptation, there's going to be times where we fall. But the difference between Saul and us should be that we get up, we rectify, and we follow.
Yeah.
And whereas Saul, he fell deeper and deeper and deeper to the point where after his starts his feud with David, we never really see a genuine holy man in Saul.
Yeah.
We see maybe some glimpses of wisdom when he comes to, but in reality, he is the evil Saul, King Saul, that we typically refer to.
Yeah. Yeah. He was doing what was right in his own eyes in the beginning, just like all the people and all the generations before him in the days of the judges. That was what the people were doing when they asked for a king in the first place, a king like the other nations. Well, what kinds of kings did they see around them? They thought they saw great military leaders and saviors in that moment who could defeat their enemies in battle. What they weren't thinking about was a man who was selfish and prideful and jealous of potential rivals, and put to death any potential enemies that he saw, and didn't know how to serve God. That was what they weren't recognizing when they said, we want a king like the other nations. God gave them a king like the other nations, someone who could defeat their enemies in battle. We saw that in the beginning, but also was jealous and prideful and willing to put to death any potential rivals. That's what they got. Instead, what they needed and what we should be doing is seeking after God first, right? Matthew 6:33, seek first the kingdom of God. Saul did that initially and then lost his way, didn't know how to do that anymore. We need to be really careful to put the most important things as the most important things. Seek first the kingdom of God. All the other things will come along and be taken care of. This doesn't mean that there aren't other things that are important too, but serving God should be of utmost importance to us. And if we're putting all our treasure in the kingdom of God, we're going to be taken care of, regardless of what else happens. Saul, if he had done that, would have been a king with great lineage afterwards. He didn't. He put his treasures here on earth, and we see where it got him in the end.
Yeah, and to sum that up, if I could, I would start with, we see Saul being a servant to his people and serving God. In the end, we see the switch to he is being served by his people,
Yeah.
which is what the kings of the other nations eventually had, is kings were there to be served, almost worshiped.
Yes.
And we see that pitfall that God warned them about truly transpire, manifest itself.
Yeah, it's really very sad to see someone with such great potential really miss the mark by quite so much.
That should be a warning to us that
Yeah.
even this great man, good looking, tall, capable of so much, can fall on a slippery slope and then in the end lose his soul.
Yeah. All right, Jamin, thank you so much for looking with me at the failures of King Saul. Next time we'll look at the successes and the rise of King David.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook for more content like this.